Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today as I share a chilling story that's been haunting me ever since it happened. This is The Shadow in Hollow Creek, a tale of fear and mystery that unfolded in a quiet American town. It starts with an ordinary night that spirals into a nightmare, revealing secrets buried in the shadows of a seemingly peaceful place. What begins as a strange feeling grows into a heart-pounding encounter that will leave you questioning what's really out there in the dark. Buckle up because this one's going to keep you on edge. I was 32 when it all went down, living in Hollow Creek, a small town in upstate New York, the kind of place where everyone knows your name and the biggest news is the annual Apple Festival. I'd moved there 2 years earlier, chasing a quieter life after a messy divorce left me drained. My name's Emily Carter and I worked as a freelance graphic designer, which suited Hollow Creek's slow pace. My house was a modest 2-story on Maple Street, with creaky floors and a big oak tree out front that dropped leaves all over my lawn. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and I loved the solitude until that night in October 2023. It was a Friday, cold enough that I had the heat on low, the radiator hissing like it was annoyed to be working. I'd spent the day finishing a logo for a local bakery, and by 9 p.m. I was curled up on my couch with a glass of red wine and a true crime podcast. The wind outside was picking up, rattling the windows, and I remember thinking how cozy it felt to be inside, safe from the autumn chill. That's when I first noticed it, a faint tapping sound like a branch against a window. I paused the podcast, straining to listen. Tap, tap, tap. It was rhythmic, too steady to be random. I told myself it was just the storm, but my stomach tightened anyway. I got up, glass still in hand, and checked the windows in the living room. Nothing but darkness outside, the streetlights barely cutting through the fog that had rolled in. Hollow Creek streets were empty by this hour. Most folks were in bed or at the Rusty Anchor, the town's only bar. I moved to the kitchen, where the back door had a small window. The tapping seemed louder there, but when I peered out, all I saw was my tiny backyard, the grass overgrown, and the old shed I never used. No branches, no movement. I laughed at myself. Emily, you're jumping at shadows. Still, I double-checked the door's lock, the click of the deadbolt oddly reassuring. Back on the couch, I tried to shake the unease. I restarted the podcast, but my focus kept drifting. The tapping had stopped, but now every creak in the house felt amplified, the floorboards settling, the fridge humming. I'd lived there long enough to know its noises, but that night they felt wrong. Like the house was holding its breath. I finished my wine, maybe a little too fast, and decided to head to bed. I was probably just tired, I reasoned, my imagination running wild after hours of staring at a screen. Upstairs, my bedroom was chilly, the window cracked open for fresh air. I closed it, the latch sticking like always, and climbed into bed. The silence was heavy, the kind that makes your ears ring. I was just drifting off when I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. This time it was closer, like it was coming from the wall behind my headboard. My heart lurched. I sat up, fumbling for the lamp on my nightstand. The light spilled across the room, but everything looked normal: bed, dresser, the pile of laundry I kept meaning to fold. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. Then, just as I exhaled, a low scrape like something dragging across the floor downstairs. My mouth went dry. I grabbed my phone, checking the time, 10:47 p.m. I thought about calling someone, but who? My closest friend in town, Sarah, was probably asleep and I didn't want to sound paranoid. Instead, I slipped out of bed, barefoot on the cold hardwood, and crept to the top of the stairs. The house was dark below, the living room light off. I flipped the switch at the top of the stairs, expecting the glow to calm me. But as the light flickered on, I froze. The back door, the one I'd locked, was wide open, swinging slightly in the wind. My breath caught in my throat, the cold air from the open back door curling up the stairs like an unwelcome guest. I stood frozen at the top of the staircase, one hand gripping the banister, the other clutching my phone so tightly my knuckles ached. The living room below was a sea of shadows, the light from the stairwell barely reaching the edges of the furniture. The door swayed gently, its hinges creaking in time with the wind, and I couldn't shake the image of someone slipping through it while I was upstairs, oblivious. My mind raced. Had I locked it wrong? Was it the wind? Or was someone in my house? I forced myself to breathe, slow and shallow, like I could make myself invisible if I stayed quiet enough. The rational part of me screamed to call 911, but my fingers hesitated over the screen. What would I say? My door's open, and I'm scared? Hollow Creek wasn't the kind of place where break-ins happened. The worst crime here was kids stealing pumpkins off porches in October. But the tapping, the scraping, those weren't pumpkins. I crept down one step, then another, the wood groaning under my weight. Each sound felt like a betrayal, announcing my presence to whatever or whoever was down there. At the bottom of the stairs, I peered into the kitchen. The back door was still open, the fog outside so thick it looked like a wall of gray. I inched forward, my bare feet sticking to the linoleum, and reached for the light switch. The fluorescent bulb flickered, casting a harsh glow over the room. Nothing seemed out of place, dishes in the sink, my laptop on the counter, a half-empty coffee mug. I grabbed a butcher knife from the block, its weight grounding me, and moved toward the door. The wind stung my face as I yanked it shut, slamming the deadbolt into place. The click was louder than I expected, echoing in the silence. I stood there, knife in hand, listening. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the comforting kind of quiet. It was the kind that made you feel watched, like eyes were boring into you from somewhere just out of sight. I turned, scanning the kitchen, then the living room. The couch, the coffee table, the bookshelf, everything was where it should be. But my wine glass, the one I'd left on the table, was on its side, a small red stain spreading into the wood. I hadn't touched it. My pulse hammered in my ears. I told myself it could have tipped over, maybe when I got up to check the windows. But deep down, I knew better. I backed away, the knife trembling in my grip, and decided to check the rest of the house. If someone was here, I wasn't going to wait for them to find me. I started with the living room, flipping on every light as I went. The shadows retreated, but the unease didn't. I checked behind the couch, under the coffee table, even inside the coat closet by the front door. Nothing. The dining room was next, just a small table and chairs, but I still pushed each chair aside, half expecting someone to lunge out. My heart was a drumbeat, each thud louder than the last. I was about to head upstairs when I heard it, a soft thud like a book falling off a shelf, coming from the basement. The basement door was in the hallway, always locked because I hated going down there. It was damp, cluttered with boxes I'd never unpacked, and the light bulb flickered like it was on its last legs. I hadn't been down there in weeks. My hand hovered over the knob, the knife raised, my breath shallow. I turned the knob slowly, the lock clicking open. The air from below was musty, carrying a faint metallic tang I didn't recognize. I flipped the switch, but the bulb only buzzed, leaving the stairs in near darkness. I took one step down, then stopped. Another thud, louder this time, followed by a faint shuffle like shoes on concrete. I slammed the door shut, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the lock. My phone was still in my pocket, and this time I didn't hesitate. I dialed Sarah, my friend who lived 3 streets over. It rang 4 times before she picked up, her voice groggy. Em? It's almost midnight, what's wrong? I tried to keep my voice steady, but it cracked as I whispered, I think someone's in my house. The back door was open, and I hear noises in the basement. There was a pause, then Sarah's voice sharpened. Lock yourself in your room. I'm calling the police and I'm coming over. Don't move. She hung up before I could respond. I ran upstairs, the knife still in my hand, and locked myself in my bedroom. I pushed the dresser against the door, the wood scraping loudly. My heart was racing so fast I felt dizzy. I sat on the bed, clutching the knife, and stared at the door, waiting for the sound of sirens or Sarah's car. The house was silent again, but it felt like a lie. Like the calm before a storm. I kept replaying the open door, the tipped glass, the noises. Someone had been here. Maybe they still were. I sat on the bed, the knife's handle slick with sweat, my eyes glued to the bedroom door. The dresser barricading it looked flimsy now, like it wouldn't hold against a determined push. The silence in the house was suffocating, broken only by the occasional creak of the walls settling. Or so I told myself. My phone lay beside me, its screen dark, and I kept checking it, willing Sarah or the police to call. Minutes dragged on, each one stretching my nerves thinner. I tried to focus on my breathing, but every inhale felt like it might be my last before something burst through the door. Then, a faint hum outside, tires on gravel. I crept to the window, peering through the blinds. A car pulled into my driveway, its headlights cutting through the fog. It was Sarah's blue sedan. Relief flooded me, but it was short-lived. She stepped out, alone, her phone pressed to her ear, her face pale under the streetlight. No police, no sirens. My stomach twisted. I waved through the window, and she looked up, her expression tense. She gestured for me to stay put, then disappeared around the side of the house, toward the back door. I wanted to scream at her to come inside, but my voice caught in my throat. What was she doing? I gripped the knife tighter, my mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. Had she seen something? Someone? I paced the room, the floorboards creaking under my feet, each step amplifying my panic. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting to hear footsteps on the stairs. The house felt alive, its shadows shifting in the corners of my vision, playing tricks on my exhausted mind. My phone buzzed, making me jump. It was a text from Sarah. "Back door's locked now. I'm coming up. Stay calm." I exhaled, but the relief was fleeting. If the door was locked, who had opened it? I moved the dresser just enough to crack the door open, listening for Sarah's footsteps. The stairs creaked, and I heard her voice, low and urgent, talking to someone. Probably the police. She reached the top, and I flung the door open, pulling her inside before relocking it. "Emily, you okay?" Sarah's eyes were wide, her hair damp from the fog. She wore a hoodie and jeans, like she'd rushed out of bed. I nodded, but my hands were still shaking. "The police are on their way," she said, glancing at the knife. I checked the backyard, nothing's out there, but I saw footprints in the mud, leading to your shed. My blood ran cold. The shed. I hadn't checked it, hadn't even thought about it. It was locked, rusted, full of junk. Or so I'd assumed. "Footprints," I whispered. Sarah nodded, her face grim. "Big ones like work boots." They stopped at the shed door. I sank onto the bed, my mind racing. Someone had been in my yard, maybe still was. The tapping, the open door, it wasn't my imagination. Sarah sat beside me, her hand on my shoulder, but her touch felt distant, like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. We sat in silence, the only sound the faint howl of the wind outside. Then, a new noise, a low, deliberate knock, coming from downstairs. Sarah's hand tightened on my arm. "That's not the police," she whispered. We stared at the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The knock came again, slower, heavier, like someone testing the house's resolve. I grabbed my phone, ready to dial 911 myself, when Sarah stood, her face set. "I'm checking the window," she said, moving before I could stop her. She peered through the blinds, her body tense. "There's someone out there," she hissed, stepping back. "By the oak tree. Just standing there." I scrambled to the window, my fear outweighed by a desperate need to know. In the fog, under the streetlight's dim glow, a figure stood motionless. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat. I couldn't see their face, but I felt their gaze, like a weight pressing against me. The figure shifted, taking a step toward the house, and I ducked, my breath ragged. Sarah pulled me back to the bed, her voice barely audible. "We stay here until the police come. Don't make a sound." I nodded, but my mind was screaming. Who was that? Why my house? I thought of the shed, the footprints, the open door. Had they been watching me all night? Longer? The knocking stopped, but the silence was worse, like the figure was waiting, listening, just as we were. I clutched the knife, my hands numb, and prayed for the sound of sirens. The silence stretched on, thick and oppressive, like the fog outside. Sarah and I sat on the bed, our backs against the headboard, the knife resting between us. My eyes darted between the door and the window, every creak of the house sending a jolt through me. The figure by the oak tree was gone, or so Sarah said after checking the window again, but I didn't trust it. I could still feel that gaze, heavy and unyielding, like it had seeped into the walls. My phone screen glowed faintly, showing no new messages, no missed calls. Where were the police? Hollow Creek Station was only 10 minutes away. Sarah's breathing was steady, but her fingers twitched, betraying her calm. "You ever hear about the old mill?" she asked suddenly, her voice low. I frowned, caught off guard. "The one by the creek? What's that got to do with anything?" She hesitated, glancing at the door like she expected it to burst open. "People talk, about things that happened there. Disappearances years ago. Folks say it's cursed." I stared at her, my fear mixing with irritation. "Sarah, there's someone outside my house, and you're telling ghost stories?" She shook her head, her eyes serious. "I'm just saying this town's got secrets. Maybe it's not random, whoever's out there." Her words hung in the air, stirring a new kind of unease. I'd heard whispers about Hollow Creek's history. Old tales of loggers vanishing in the 1800s, rumors of a cult in the woods, but I dismissed them as small-town folklore. I was about to snap at her when a faint siren wailed in the distance, growing louder. Relief flooded me, but it was tempered by dread. What would the police find? Sarah squeezed my hand, and we waited, the sirens now close enough to rattle the windows. A sharp rap at the front door made us both jump. Hollow Creek PD, a man's voice called. I scrambled to move the dresser, my hands clumsy with adrenaline. Sarah helped, and we hurried downstairs, the knife still in my grip. I opened the front door to find 2 officers, their flashlights sweeping the yard. The older one, Officer Daniels, had a weathered face and a calm demeanor. "You Emily Carter?" he asked. I nodded, my voice shaky as I explained. The open door, the noises, the figure by the tree. The younger officer, Ruiz, jotted notes, his eyes scanning the house. Daniels stepped inside, his boots loud on the hardwood. "We'll check the property. Stay here." Ruiz stayed with us, his hand resting on his holster. Sarah recounted the footprints, and I mentioned the shed, my voice faltering as I described the tapping. Ruiz nodded, but I caught a flicker of skepticism in his eyes. "Could be kids," he said. "Happens around Halloween." I wanted to scream that this wasn't kids, but I bit my tongue, my fear outweighing my frustration. The officers returned after what felt like hours, though my phone showed only 20 minutes had passed. Daniel's face was grim. "No one's out there now," he said. "But we found tracks in the yard, leading to the shed. Doors locked, but there's a broken window in the back. Someone could have gotten in." My stomach dropped. "We'll need to check inside," he added. I handed him the shed key, my hands trembling. I hadn't opened it in months, hadn't even looked at it closely since moving in. While Ruiz stayed with us, Daniels and another officer, who'd arrived as backup, headed to the shed. Sarah and I sat on the couch, the living room light harsh against the night. I kept glancing at the back door, half expecting it to swing open again. Sarah's talk of the mill gnawed at me, stirring memories of a conversation at the Rusty Anchor months ago. A bartender had mentioned trouble at the mill, something about a fire in the 70s, but I'd been too tipsy to care. Now it felt like a warning I'd ignored. Daniels returned, his flashlight off, his expression unreadable. "Shed's empty," he said, "but there's stuff in there, blankets, food wrappers, a knife. Looks like someone's been camping out." My heart sank. Someone had been living in my shed, feet from my house, watching me. "We'll dust for prints," he continued. "But it's probably a vagrant. We've had reports of squatters in town." I nodded, but his words didn't comfort me. A vagrant didn't explain the figure's deliberate stare, the knocking, the feeling of being hunted. The officers left, promising to patrol the area, but the house felt no safer. Sarah insisted on staying over, and we locked every door and window, double-checking each one. As we sat in the kitchen, sipping coffee to stay awake, I couldn't shake Sarah's words about the mill. Something about this felt personal, like the shadow outside wasn't just passing through. I didn't know it then, but I was about to uncover a truth that would make me question everything I thought I knew about Hollow Creek. Sarah and I stayed in the kitchen, the coffee growing cold in our mugs. The clock on the wall ticked past 3 a.m., each second a reminder of the sleepless night ahead. The house was locked tight, every light blazing, but it felt like a stage set, like the safety was an illusion. Sarah's eyes were red-rimmed, her earlier calm replaced by a jittery edge. I wasn't much better, my hands wouldn't stop shaking, and the knife lay on the table, its blade catching the light. The police were gone, their patrol car a distant memory, and the shed's contents haunted me. Blankets. Wrappers. A knife. Someone had been living there, so close I could have heard them breathing if I'd listened hard enough. I kept replaying the night, the open door, the figure by the tree, the tapping that seemed to follow me. My mind churned with questions. Why my house? Was it random, or had I been chosen? Sarah's mention of the mill kept surfacing like a splinter I couldn't ignore. I pushed my mug aside and looked at her. "Tell me more about the mill," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She blinked, startled, then leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly. "It's just stories," she said, but her tone lacked conviction. "The mill shut down after a fire in 76. People said it wasn't an accident, that someone burned it to cover something up. There were rumors, missing workers, strange rituals in the woods." She paused, glancing at the window. A few years ago, some kids swore they saw lights out there like someone was still using it. I frowned, my skepticism warring with fear. And you think that's connected to this? She shrugged, but her eyes were uneasy. I don't know, Em. But Hollow Creek small. Nothing happens here without a reason. Her words sent a chill through me. I stood, needing to move, and paced the kitchen. The linoleum was cold under my feet, grounding me in the moment. I wanted to dismiss the mill as nonsense, but the shed, the footprints, they were real. I stopped by the sink, staring at the back door. The deadbolt was secure, but I pressed my hand against it anyway, needing the reassurance. That's when I noticed the scratch marks, faint, jagged lines around the lock, like someone had tried to pry it open. My breath hitched. I hadn't seen them earlier, hadn't thought to look closely. Sarah, I called, my voice trembling. She joined me, her face paling as she traced the marks with her finger. That's not new, she whispered. Someone's been trying to get in. The realization hit like a punch. This wasn't a one-night intrusion. Someone had been testing my house, maybe for days, weeks. I thought of the times I'd felt watched, dismissed as paranoia, nights when the oak tree's shadow seemed to move, mornings when my trash cans were tipped over, blamed on raccoons. My knees felt weak and I gripped the counter, the room spinning. Sarah pulled me back to the table, her voice firm. We're safe right now. The police know. We'll figure this out. But her words felt hollow, like she was convincing herself as much as me. We decided to stay awake, taking turns watching the windows. Sarah sat by the living room window, her phone in hand, while I stationed myself in the kitchen, the knife within reach. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that amplifies every sound. A branch scraped the roof and I flinched, my heart racing. I kept glancing at the basement door, still locked, but its presence loomed like a threat. What if whoever was in the shed had gotten inside before? What if they knew the house better than I did? Around 4 a.m., Sarah called me over. Look at this, she said, holding up her phone. She'd been scrolling through a local forum, a thread about Hollow Creek's ghosts. Most were silly, haunted barns, headless farmers, but one post caught my eye. It was from last year, anonymous, claiming someone had seen a man in a dark coat near the mill, carrying a knife. The user said he'd been watching houses on Maple Street, my street, before disappearing into the woods. The thread ended abruptly with no follow-ups. My mouth went dry. That's him, I whispered. The guy by the tree. Sarah's face was grim. We need to tell the police. I nodded, but a new fear was taking root. If this man was tied to the mill, to the town's past, what did he want with me? I wasn't a local, had no ties to Hollow Creek's history. Or did I? My house had been a steal, bought from an estate sale after the previous owner, an old recluse, died. I'd never asked questions, too desperate for a fresh start. Now, I wondered what I'd walked into. As dawn crept in, the sky turning a sickly gray, I felt no relief. The night had changed me, stripped away the illusion of safety. Sarah and I made more coffee, our eyes burning with exhaustion, but sleep was impossible. The man in the coat was out there, and I knew he wasn't done with me. The first light of dawn did little to ease the knot in my chest. Sarah and I sat in the living room, the curtains drawn, the house still blazing with light. The coffee was bitter now, doing nothing to shake the fog of exhaustion. My eyes burned, and every sound, the radiator's hiss, a car passing on Maple Street, made me flinch. The knife was back in my hand, its weight a constant reminder of the threat lingering just beyond my walls. Sarah's phone lay on the coffee table, the forum post about the man in the coat still open, its words seared into my mind. I couldn't stay here, not with the scratch marks on the door, the shed's contents, the figure's stare burned into my memory. We can't just wait, I said, my voice hoarse. The police didn't find him. He's still out there. Sarah nodded, her face drawn. You're right. We should go to my place. It's safer and we can call Daniels from there. Her house was on Elm Street, a 10-minute walk closer to the town center. The idea of leaving felt like surrender, but staying felt like suicide. I grabbed my coat, a pair of sneakers, and my keys, my hands shaking as I stuffed my phone in my pocket. Sarah checked the windows one last time, her movements quick, like she expected the figure to appear. We stepped onto the porch, the morning air sharp and damp. The fog had thinned, but the street was eerily quiet, the oak tree looming like a sentinel. I locked the front door, my fingers fumbling, and we hurried down the steps, our breath visible in the cold. Maple Street was deserted, the houses dark, their curtains drawn. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the man in the coat behind us. Sarah's hand brushed mine, a silent reassurance, but her eyes were scanning the shadows too. We cut through an alley behind the bakery, the shortest route to Elm Street. The alley was narrow, lined with overflowing dumpsters and broken crates, the air thick with the smell of stale bread and garbage. Our footsteps echoed, too loud in the stillness. I gripped the knife in my coat pocket, its blade a small comfort. Halfway through, I stopped, my heart lurching. A shadow moved at the far end of the alley, tall and broad, vanishing behind a dumpster. Sarah froze beside me, her hand on my arm. "Did you see that?" she whispered. I nodded, my throat tight. It could have been a stray dog, a trick of the light, but I knew it wasn't. We backed away, our steps slow, eyes fixed on the dumpster. The alley felt like a trap, its walls closing in. I wanted to run, but fear kept me rooted, my legs heavy. Then a metallic clatter, a can rolling across the pavement. Sarah gasped, and I spun, the knife now in my hand. Nothing. Just the empty alley, the fog curling around the edges. "We need to move," Sarah hissed, pulling me toward the street. We broke into a jog, the bakery's back door in sight, when I heard it, a low whistle, sharp and deliberate, coming from behind us. My blood ran cold. I didn't look back, couldn't afford to. We reached the street, the bakery's neon sign a faint glow in the dawn. Sarah's house was 5 minutes away, but it felt like miles. We kept moving, sticking to the main roads, the whistle echoing in my mind. It wasn't random. It was him playing with us, letting us know he was close. My lungs burned, my sneakers slapping the pavement, but fear drove me forward. Sarah's face was pale, her eyes wide, but she didn't slow down. We reached Elm Street, her house a small brick rancher with a tidy lawn. She fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking as badly as mine. Inside, she slammed the door, locking it and sliding a chain across. The living room was warm, cluttered with books and plants, but it offered no comfort. I collapsed onto her couch, the knife clattering to the floor. Sarah grabbed her phone, dialing Daniel's number from the card he'd left. "He's following us," she told him, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "We saw someone in the alley." Daniel's promised to send a car, but his tone was clipped, like he was humoring us. We sat in silence, the adrenaline fading, leaving me hollow. I kept seeing the shadow in the alley, hearing the whistle. He'd been so close, close enough to reach out. Why hadn't he? The thought was worse than the chase, it meant he was in control, toying with me. Sarah brought me a glass of water, her face etched with worry. "You need to rest," she said, but I shook my head. Rest was impossible. I needed answers. The mill, the man, the shed, they were pieces of a puzzle I didn't understand, but I was starting to see its shape. Sarah's living room was a fortress of light, every lamp on, but it couldn't banish the fear gnawing at me. The couch was soft, the air warm, yet I shivered, my coat still on, the knife back in my hand. Sarah sat across from me, her phone on the coffee table, waiting for Daniels to call back. The alley chase replayed in my mind, the shadow, the whistle, the certainty that he'd been steps away. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. I kept glancing at the windows, expecting to see that dark coat, that faceless stare. Sarah broke the silence. "We need to know more about the mill," she said, her voice firm. "If that guy's tied to it, we can't just wait for the police." I nodded, too tired to argue, but the idea of digging into Hollow Creek's past felt like opening a door I couldn't close. She grabbed her laptop, pulling up the town's historical society website. The page was outdated, with grainy photos of the mill in its heyday, tall, grim, its smokestack looming over the creek. Articles mentioned the 1976 fire, calling it a tragedy that killed 2 workers, but details were vague. One line caught my eye: "Local rumors persist of unauthorized activity at the site prior to the blaze." Unauthorized activity? I muttered. Sarah scrolled further, finding a blog post linked from the site, written by a retired librarian named Martha Klein. It claimed the mill had been a meeting place for a group called the Order of the Creek, a secretive bunch in the 70s obsessed with protecting the town's legacy. The post was cryptic, hinting at rituals, missing persons, and a cover-up after the fire. Martha wrote that some believed the order never disbanded, its members fading into Hollow Creek's quiet streets. My skin prickled. The man in the coat, the shed, the whistle, could he be part of this? It sounded insane, like a conspiracy theory, but Hollow Creek's stillness hid something darker, I was sure of it. Sarah's eyes were wide. "Martha lives on Oak Street," she said. "We could talk to her." The idea terrified me, but staying ignorant was worse. I agreed, but only after the police checked the area. Daniels called at 7 a.m., his voice gruff. "No sign of anyone on Elm or Maple. We're stretched thin, budget cuts. Stay vigilant." His dismissal stung, but I wasn't surprised. Hollow Creek's police were more about parking tickets than manhunts. Sarah and I decided to visit Martha at noon when the streets would be busier, safer. We spent the morning in a haze, jumping at every noise, checking the locks obsessively. I showered, the hot water doing little to ease the tension in my shoulders, and changed into jeans and a sweater, the knife tucked into my bag. At 11:30 we left for Oak Street, the sun high but weak, the air crisp. The town was waking up, kids on bikes, cars heading to the diner, but I felt exposed like a target. Martha's house was a gray Victorian, its porch sagging, windows curtained. We knocked, and an older woman answered, her hair white, her eyes sharp. "You're here about the mill," she said before we spoke, ushering us inside. The living room smelled of lavender and old books, shelves overflowing with papers. Martha sat us down, her gaze piercing. "I saw your house on the news last year, Emily. Estate sale, right? Did you know who lived there before?" I shook my head, my stomach churning. She leaned forward, her voice low. "Jacob Heller. He was in the order. Disappeared after the fire. Some say he never left." My breath caught. My house, Heller's house, had been his. Martha pulled out a photo, faded and creased, showing a group of men by the mill. One, tall and broad, wore a dark coat. I froze. It was him. The man by the tree. "That's not possible," I stammered. "He'd be old now." Martha's eyes darkened. "Some things don't age like they should." Before I could process it, a loud crash came from the back of the house. Martha jumped, her face paling. "Stay here," she said, grabbing a cane and heading toward the noise. Sarah and I exchanged a look, my heart racing. I grabbed the knife from my bag, following despite her warning. The back door was open, a shattered vase on the floor. Outside, in the yard, stood the man in the coat, his face obscured, staring directly at me. I screamed, stumbling back, and Sarah pulled me inside, slamming the door. Martha returned, her face grim. "He knows you're asking questions," she said, her voice trembling. "And he doesn't like it." Martha's words hung in the air, heavy as the lavender scent in her cramped living room. My scream still echoed in my ears, the image of the man in the coat burned into my vision. Sarah's hand gripped my arm, her nails digging in, grounding me as I fought the urge to run. The back door was locked now, Martha's cane propped against it, but it felt like a flimsy barrier. Outside, the yard was empty, the man gone as quickly as he'd appeared, but his presence lingered, a shadow that followed me from Maple Street to here. Martha sat across from us, her hands steady despite the tremor in her voice. "You've stirred something up, Emily," she said, her eyes locked on mine. "The order never forgave those who asked questions." I swallowed, my throat dry. "I didn't ask for this. I just bought a house." She shook her head, her expression pitying. "You didn't choose it. It chose you. Heller's house, it's a beacon for them." My mind reeled. Jacob Heller, the order, the mill, it was too much, a tangled web I'd stumbled into blindly. Sarah spoke, her voice sharp. "Who's them? And why's this guy after her?" Martha sighed, pulling a folder from a shelf, its edges yellowed. The order believed Hollow Creek was sacred, tied to something older than the town. They guarded it at any cost. Heller was their enforcer, silencing anyone who got too close. She opened the folder, revealing newspaper clippings, missing persons, unexplained fires, all from the 70s. One name stood out, Anna Klein. Martha's sister. She asked questions, Martha said, her voice breaking. "They took her. I've been waiting for them to come for me ever since." My heart sank. This wasn't just history, it was personal, a wound that hadn't healed. I looked at the photo again, the man in the coat staring back through decades. "That's him," I said, my voice barely audible. "But how? He'd be in his 80s. Martha's eyes darkened. "Some say the order found something at the mill, something that changes you. I don't believe in curses, but I've seen things, lights in the woods, shapes that don't move right." Sarah scoffed, but her hands were clenched, betraying her fear. I wanted to leave, to run back to my old life, but there was no escaping this. The man knew where I lived, where I went. He'd been in my yard, my shed, maybe my house. I thought of the scratch marks, the tipped wine glass, the whistle in the alley. He was toying with me, drawing out the fear. "What does he want?" I asked, dreading the answer. Martha closed the folder. "To protect the secret. Or to claim you for it. You live in Heller's house. To them, you're part of it now." The room felt smaller, the air thick. Sarah stood, pacing. "We need to go to the police, show them this." Martha shook her head. "They won't believe you. The order had people everywhere, cops, council members. Why do you think the mill was never investigated?" My stomach twisted. Daniel's dismissal, Ruiz's skepticism, it wasn't just budget cuts. I felt trapped, the town closing in like a noose. We left Martha's, promising to stay in touch. She gave me the folder, her hands trembling. "Be careful," she said, her eyes haunted. Outside, the sun was sinking, casting long shadows across Oak Street. Sarah and I walked back to her house, the folder heavy in my bag, the knife heavier in my pocket. The streets were quiet, but I felt eyes on me, hidden in the dusk. We passed the Rusty Anchor, its neon sign flickering, and I remembered the bartender's warning about the mill. I hadn't listened then, but now it felt like a prophecy. At Sarah's, we locked ourselves in again, spreading the folder's contents on her dining table. Clippings, photos, handwritten notes, Martha's obsession laid bare. One note mentioned a symbol, a crescent moon with a slash carved into trees near the mill. I'd seen it before on a fence post near my house, dismissed as vandalism. My blood ran cold. This was real and it was everywhere. As night fell, Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Stop looking," it read. My heart stopped. Sarah's face paled and she dropped the phone, its screen glowing in the dim light. The room was silent, but outside, a faint whistle pierced the night, sharp and deliberate, just like in the alley. He was here, and he wasn't hiding anymore. The whistle cut through the night, sharp as a blade, freezing me in place. Sarah's phone lay on the table, the text, "Stop looking," glowing like a warning carved in stone. My hands shook, the knife in my pocket useless against the dread pooling in my chest. Sarah's eyes were wide, her breath ragged, as she grabbed the phone and turned it off like that could erase the message. The whistle stopped, leaving a silence so heavy it pressed against my skin. He was out there, the man in the coat, closer than ever, and I knew this wasn't a game anymore. Sarah moved first, checking the locks, her movements frantic. "We need to leave," she said, her voice trembling. "Go to the diner, somewhere public." I nodded, but my legs felt like lead. Leaving meant facing the dark, the streets where he could be waiting. But staying was worse, trapped in a house that felt like a cage. We grabbed our coats, the folder, and my knife, and slipped out the back door, sticking to the shadows of her yard. The air was cold, the fog thick again, muffling the world. Every step felt like a risk, my eyes scanning for that dark silhouette. We reached Main Street, the diner's lights a beacon in the haze. Inside, it was warm, smelling of grease and coffee, a handful of regulars at the counter. We slid into a booth, the vinyl creaking, and ordered coffee we didn't drink. The folder lay between us, its secrets too dangerous to open here. I kept glancing at the windows, expecting to see him, but the street was empty. Sarah leaned in, her voice low. "We need a plan. Martha's right, the police won't help. We have to end this ourselves." Her words scared me, but she was right. The order, the mill, Heller, it was all connected, and I was the target. I thought of the symbol, the crescent moon, carved into my fence. It wasn't random. Heller's house was a mark, and I'd walked into it blindly. "The mill," I said, my voice steady despite the fear. "We go there, find whatever they're hiding. If we expose it, he'll have no reason to come after me." Sarah's face paled, but she nodded. "Tomorrow at dawn. We'll need light and tools, something to break in." The rest of the night passed in the diner, the waitresses casting curious glances as we sat, silent, our coffee cold. At 5 a.m. we left, the sky gray, the town stirring. We stopped at Sarah's to grab flashlights, a crowbar, and her dad's old hunting rifle, which she handled with uneasy confidence. The mill was a mile out, past the creek, its smokestack visible through the trees. We drove in silence, my hands gripping the folder, Martha's warnings echoing in my head. The mill was a ruin, its walls blackened, windows shattered, the creek murmuring nearby. We parked a distance away, approaching on foot, the rifle slung over Sarah's shoulder. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of rot and ash. The crescent moon symbol was carved into a tree by the entrance, fresh, the sap still wet. My stomach twisted. We were expected. Sarah pried open the rusted door, the crowbar screeching, and we stepped inside, the darkness swallowing us. The mill's interior was a maze of broken machinery and charred beams, the floor littered with debris. Our flashlights cut through the gloom, revealing graffiti, beer cans, signs of trespassers. But deeper in, we found something else, a circle of stones, candles melted into the floor, the crescent symbol etched in the center. My breath caught. This was no urban legend. Sarah's face was grim, the rifle raised. "They're still here," she whispered. A noise, a footstep on broken glass, came from the shadows. I spun, my flashlight catching a glimpse of a dark coat. "Show yourself," I shouted, my voice echoing. Silence, then a low chuckle, chillingly familiar. The man stepped into the light, his face weathered, eyes cold, the same as the photo but impossibly young. "You shouldn't have come, Emily," he said, his voice like gravel. I raised the knife, my hand steady despite the fear. "What do you want?" He smiled, stepping closer. "The house. The legacy. You're in the way." Sarah fired a warning shot, the sound deafening, but he didn't flinch. He lunged, faster than I expected, knocking the knife from my hand. I stumbled, Sarah screaming, the rifle jamming. We ran, weaving through the machinery, his footsteps heavy behind us. I grabbed a rusted pipe, swinging it as he closed in, catching his shoulder. He grunted, slowing, and we burst outside, sprinting to the car. We drove, tires screeching, his figure fading in the rearview, but his laugh lingered, a promise of return. We didn't stop driving until we reached the diner, the car skidding into the lot as the sun rose, painting the sky a bruised purple. My hands gripped the wheel, knuckles white, my body trembling from the adrenaline. Sarah was silent, the rifle across her lap, her face pale as death. The mill's darkness clung to us, the man's laugh echoing in, his words, "You're in the way," a weight I couldn't shake. We'd escaped, but it didn't feel like victory. He was still out there, tied to a secret we'd only scratched the surface of, and I knew he'd come again. Inside the diner, we sat in the same booth, the morning crowd louder now, oblivious to the nightmare we'd lived. I called Daniels, my voice shaking as I told him about the mill, the man, the symbol. He listened, but his tone was skeptical, promising to look into it. I hung up, frustration burning through me. Sarah pushed the folder toward me, its clippings spilling out. "We need to expose this," she said, her voice fierce. "The order, the mill, people need to know." I nodded, but doubt not at me. Martha had warned us about the order's reach. Would anyone believe us? We spent the day at Sarah's, typing up everything, Martha's story, the folder's contents, our encounter at the mill. I photographed the symbol, the clippings, even the scratch marks on my door. Sarah posted it to the local forum, anonymous, hoping to spark questions, maybe draw out others who knew the truth. By evening, replies poured in, some dismissive, others curious, a few claiming similar sightings of the man in the coat. One user, Creekwatcher, messaged privately saying they'd seen the symbol carved near the creek last week, fresh like a marker. My heart sank. The order was active and we'd poked the hornet's nest. I couldn't go back to my house, not yet. Sarah offered her guest room and I accepted, though sleep was impossible. I lay awake, the knife under my pillow, every creak of the house a threat. I thought of Heller, the mill, the man who didn't age. Was he Heller, or something else, bound to the order's secret? The crescent symbol haunted me, it slashed like a wound. I wondered about Anna Klein, the others who'd vanished. Had they seen him too, felt his stare? Days passed, the forum post gaining traction, but no police action. Daniels called once, saying the mill was under investigation, but I heard the lie in his voice. Sarah and I met Martha again, who urged us to leave town. "They don't forgive," she said, her eyes hollow. I considered it, but Hollow Creek had changed me. I couldn't run, not without answers. I started researching the house, digging into Heller's life. Records showed he'd owned it until 1976, then vanished, the property passing through estates until I bought it. A librarian found a journal, Heller's, mentioning the pact and the creek's price. It was vague, but it confirmed Martha's story, something unnatural bound the order to the town. One night, a week later, I woke to a noise, a tap at Sarah's window. My heart raced as I grabbed the knife, creeping to the blinds. Outside, the crescent symbol was scratched into the glass, fresh, glistening in the moonlight. No one was there, but the message was clear, he hadn't forgotten. I didn't scream, didn't wake Sarah. I sat by the window, knife in hand, watching the dark, knowing this wasn't over. The order's secret was bigger than me, than Heller, than the mill. I'd fight, expose it, but part of me wondered if I'd ever escape its shadow. This has been The Shadow in Hollow Creek, a story that's left me looking over my shoulder, questioning every shadow. Thanks for sticking with me through this chilling tale. I hope it's given you a shiver or two. Stay safe out there and maybe check your locks tonight.